This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to Level 1, Lesson 1. And as always, everything that we're going to be talking about today is for educational purposes only, and nothing is intended as any type of investment advice. All right, so the beginning of this round of our classes, let's talk about what we're going to be doing over the next couple of days. So essentially what these classes are going to be about is understanding that controlling prints are basically the start to a trade, but there's a lot more that we need to add into things to really find those high probability trades and really, kind of create the expectations of exactly what those controlling prints are going to do. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about number 1 trades and number 2 trades, and then tomorrow we're going to talk about number 3 trades and number 4 trades. Now we're going to talk about them in theory. And what I mean by that is we're gonna wait till level 2 to actually start applying it into the market and really waiting and looking for what we want live from what we're going to be doing in our original classes. All right, let's start off with something. Too much of the time we see, well, let's start off. What's the number 1 trade? Everyone here should probably, should know what a number 1 trade is. What do we look for a number 1 trade? Because defining it is the first step. So what's our number 1 trade? Is build off ask prints. And that's exactly, it's ask prints that are over print personality that aren't showing us shorter term, but rather showing us that a market maker is looking to build a larger position. Okay, we haven't talked about this in a while, but it's the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so we have to understand when we see something, what's actually happening more than likely is going to be way bigger. Okay, because if they're showing us that much, really what they're doing behind the scenes is way, way, way more. This is where these large positions are going to come from. Okay, so the actual number 1 trade is what we're looking to do is we're looking to take a short to ride their building phase, to essentially help them continue the stock down for them to be able to build a bigger position for it to eventually come and be able to come back up for those ask prints to be able to make their money. Now, I want you to think about something for a second, though. Now, too many of us, we see a stock coming to a level, we see really great ask prints, okay, and what we want to do is we want to short it for a number 1 trade. I mean, obviously, because what the prints are telling us. But at the end of the day, and this is going to apply to every single trade that we're going to be talking about, okay, 1 through 4. At the end of the day, those ask prints, what percentage does it give us that trade will be successful, taking that number 1 trade towards the downside? What percentage is that going to give us? 60%. So if I go into my morning with a strategy of waiting to see ask prints, way over print personality, and looking to short them from those prints alone, essentially, I'm trading a coin flip. Now, eventually, is it going to build? Okay, that's great, but eventually doesn't help us. Okay, understanding what the controlling prints eventually are going to do does not help us get into a trade. Timing is one of the most important things. So what we really want to do is we want to add timing to our trades. Now, what's the easiest way to understand timing? If we're looking for that 60% to go higher because the timing of that actually happening now, what's the best way for us to go about it? What do we need? What are we going to need in order for us to actually take that trade? Well, not print personality, because we should already know print personality. If we're looking for a number 1 trade, we have to, the prints have to be above it. So we should already know print personality at that time. But what's really going to tell us that it's time? So off-level reaction prints, yes, those are some other things, but not the main one. Volume, we're getting closer. What do we need to take a trade? There we go. We need a trigger. Okay, a trigger is going to tell us essentially what the timing is. But is that enough during the summertime? And when I say is that enough, yes. Are there going to be trades where it is? There are. But is that a strategy during lower volume times that's really going to help us get a high win percentage? Because the strategy alone at the top that it can possibly be is going to be what percent? And this is if it's absolutely perfect. What's the top percent that we can get with prints and a trigger? Is 70%. So we're getting to, to a good spot, but the problem with 70% trades is that 3 out of 10 times it's going to be wrong, which is perfectly fine when you have multiple trades to be able to be taken. Now, what does 70% mean during very slow volume times? And it's something we don't really think about too much. We just think 70%, okay, that's a high percentage that we can take it. But during lower volume times, those 3 trades, could they happen in the beginning of the day? Could we take 3 70% trades and all 3 of them be wrong? Of course we could. But I want you to think about something. During the summertime, okay, when we have this deathly slow market after pretty much about 10:30, what's the problem with 70%? Or going into the morning with a strategy of being okay with taking just a 70% trade. What's the problem there? It's what makes summertime one of the hardest times to trade, but we can fix this, and I'm going to show you guys how in a second. So it's not that the percents are lower, because it's still going to be 70%, but the problem is that are we going to have a lot of trades throughout the day? Because 70% means 3 out of 10 will be wrong, 7 out of 10 are going to be correct. But what if there's not 10 trades? What does that do to us as our trading percentage? So not the trade itself, because the trade itself is still 70%, but for us specifically, are we going to be able to spread our percentages out over an abundant amount of trades? Not really. There's days where by the time 10:30 comes, yeah, there might have been 10 trades, but 5 of them are happening at the same time, and the other 5 are coming out. So what happens is that it's so important for us to the trades that we focus on for us to really nail them. And the best way to go about that is understanding how do we get something to a very high percentage. Okay, and today what we're going to be talking about is how we're going to do that with our number 1 trades, because the prints and the trigger are not enough. There's just not enough volume. There's not enough real go time that's going to be happening. And of course, you're going to have, days where there's, some great days here and there. But again, the name of the game is consistency. We have to be consistent whether it's slow and there's only 5 trades that day. We have to be consistent if there's, 50 trades that day. We have to be consistent if we can only find 1 trade that day. But it's so much more important for us to really be able to add strategy to what the market maker's game plan, what they're telling us. And by really being able to understand what kind of strategy that they show us that we want to be part of. And there's certain things that we want to start to look for. We don't want to just go out there in the morning and say, okay, well, there's prints way above ask, okay, way above print personality on the ask, and I'm going to look to just take it to the downside. That's not going to be enough. So we have to start thinking about things that we know. Okay, and I'm going to give you guys some strategies to add to number 1 trades. I'm going to bring out the trusty paint. All right, so let's start off by thinking what needs to happen for us to take a number 1 trade? What is it going to have to look like? Just the first stage of looking to take a number 1 trade. What is it going to have to look like? Uptrend, very simple. Okay, we're going to have to see a stock that goes like this first. Okay, And the numbers are really irrelevant at this point, but we have to have levels too, obviously. So these little tick marks that I'm going to draw next to this uptrend are all going to be levels. All right. Now, it's funny because when you draw an uptrend, most people out there are going to look at it and it's going to look exactly the same to every single person. I could draw 5 of those lines, and technically 5 of those lines are going to look exactly the same. But is every uptrend the same? Is it composed of the same substance? It is not. So let's think of a few different things that the uptrend itself can give us that are going to add to the percentage of the stock being able to come back down. Now, one of the best strategies and one of the best ways that we can look for a market maker, okay, this is number one, the first thing, because when this happens, it's almost always going to result the same way. And we want to add things like that. Okay, the first thing we're going to look for is for stocks that go in an uptrend that have absolutely no substance. Okay, what do I mean by that? What does it mean when a stock goes up on nothing? Yeah, there's really no reason for it to be going up. It's going up on nothing. Now, about 90% of the time, when a stock goes up on nothing, what ends up happening? Ends up coming back down. So when we know that a stock that goes up on nothing ends up coming back down, what could be better for us than to find a stock that goes past the first level, okay, goes past the second level, goes past the third level, and then all of a sudden up here, we get our ask above print personality. What is going to happen in that scenario to a very high percentage? So we go a couple levels. We're not getting any controlling prints at those levels. Essentially, the stock is pushing up on nothing. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we get ask prints way above print personality. What does that market maker strategy tell us about when this stock is now going to turn into a number one trade that we can take? It's a now type play, because they didn't print at any of the lower spots, but now they're printing at the top and showing us build. When a stock goes up on nothing, we have to think of it almost as there's no real floor there. It's just hollow. All right. And think about anything, if you were to drop a ball and, down, let's say a pipe that's hollow, well, it's just going to keep going until it finally hits a bottom. But with no substance in it, there really is no bottom. So this type of strategy or this type of market maker scenario allows us a huge added percentage to be able to take a number one trade. Because almost always a stock that goes up on nothing, that those ask prints above print personality act as almost an instant catalyst for the stock going right back to where it eventually came from. Now, what we want to do is we want to see enough ask prints in that stock that matches up for the calculations for it to go back to where it came from. So in this case, we would want to see enough ask at this level that the stock essentially ends up coming right back down to where it started going up on nothing. This happens constantly, because it's not just about ask prints. There's a lot. We need to understand the actual market maker's game plan. Because why would a stock go up on nothing, okay, and then all of a sudden them hit the ask like that and show that they want to buy and that the stock has more room to continue up? Well, what happened during this entire time? Were they able to build, or did they build as the stock was going up? They did not, which is perfect because that means they want to bring it back down to build. They're not going to just let it just go and not do anything at all those points. This gives us a huge advantage in taking a number one because of the way the trend, the uptrend actually started. Now, I'm going to ask you guys another question. Do I want the uptrend to look something like this? Or do I want it to look something like this? Number one or number two? Steeper line. Why is that? Definitely attracting retail. What's it also telling me about its personality? Because obviously, we're talking about different strategies, but everything that we ever talk about all needs to be, encompassed into what we're doing. So what does that tell us about the strategy? When the stock goes straight up, its personality is showing us that its ability to come back down is a lot quicker versus a stock that slowly continues up and continues up, because one of them is bringing in more retail. So wouldn't we want as much retail interest in it if we're going to bring it all the way back down to start building? And when I say we, I mean us as the trader, the market maker, obviously. But wouldn't we want that same exact thing for them to come in? So we want to, even just looking at this uptrend, we want to make sure that that uptrend is showing us that, it's quick. We want it to look nice. And when I say look nice, because the people that are retail, that are watching this chart, when they see something like that, or, really just kind of price action movement that happens quickly, they get interested, they entering, then there's a lot more of a pool for them to build with. When the quicker the pool gets bigger, okay, the quicker our number one trade is going to come into that fruition. So this is the first one, okay, going up on nothing, printing ask way above print personality. We get almost an instant type move back towards the downside. Okay, we're going to add print lines and all that other stuff into this a little bit later. But right now we need to talk about our uptrends. So let's talk about a secondary scenario. Okay, there's prints at every one of the levels. So it comes up, okay, and it gives ask above print personality here, gives ask above print personality here, ask above print personality here, ask above print personality there. So now we're at multiple levels with ask at every single level, none of them which have pulled back. Now, which scenario has a higher percentage for our number one trade? Okay, is it the first one or the second one? So going up on nothing, showing big ask above print personality, coming back down, we know is a very, very high percentage. What if it's printing at every single level? So we have a great trade. Now we have what type of trade? Can we go any higher than 70%? Is it 70%? Because there's many of us that have tried to take number one trades because it printed at multiple levels and it just never pulled back from any of them. What's our problem there with this type of strategy? Or it's not even a strategy, this type of what the market maker's doing, the market maker strategy at this point. What's the problem there? Is that within itself alone adding anything to a number one trade for us? Think about it. The problem is printing at every level. Well, again, we're thinking of what market maker strategy enhances taking a number one trade. Now, if they're printing at every level and the stock is just continuing up, why does that become a problem? Has anyone here ever tried to take number one trade 4 times and the stock has literally just kept going after huge ass prints at a level as it printed level after level after level? Anyone ever get caught in that before? Of course. So the problem that's there is it actually gives us no ability for timing. Because what's to really tell us that price action and volume is going to be a trigger when it's proven that it's not a trigger over and over and over again? Do we really have any type of benefit when we see this type of strategy being employed? Excuse me. Is there really any type of benefit? Now, it's funny because a lot of people would sit there and think, well, you know what? It keeps printing at levels, so we're going to have to see this huge pullback. But when do we know it's the right time? Do we really? Can we actually even get a 10% trigger in this scenario? Yes, well, now that's when we're going to start implementing certain thing, and we're going to get there. Okay, but yes, we would need to see it come up to a psych level. But even with that psych level coming up, are we ever going to get can we have a 10% trigger in that scenario? And what do we also know about psych levels? Do they like to play games at psych levels? So am I ever really going to have that confidence like I did in the first scenario of the stock now coming down in this scenario? No, because I know there's going to be games being played there. So it's not even that the psych level is where I want it to be, but in this scenario, for me to really get a high probability trade, because this happens, it doesn't mean that we can't take it, because eventually we do see it come back and it prints all at the same time. Excuse me, it makes that pullback all at the same time. We do see that happen, and it's a great trade. But with a psych level alone isn't enough. What do we actually want to see in this scenario? Do we want to see it at a psych level trigger, or do we want to see it push past the psych level with no real short-term ability to continue and then take a trigger? Which one gives us the high probability? Exactly. So in this scenario, does not mean that we can't take the trade, but until we get to a perfect spot, it's got to be a 5 or a 0, okay? Or, it could be 250, but either way, it's got to be a big psych level in this scenario. And what we want is we need it to push past the psych level while running out of any type of ability to continue. What that means is that essentially, the last prints that we saw that need to make money have to have made their money, and it is past that point with no real reason for it to continue. Because now when there's no real reason for it to continue, what can we expect to happen? What can we expect to happen? Yeah, it needs to refuel, or we're going to expect the stock to now go back towards its building side of things. Because for a stock to continue to go up and print level after level after level without actually pulling back, means there has to be some type of shorter term going on. Now, the print personality might be terrible, and it might not look like there's shorter term prints going on that are actually pushing it, but we have to think about something. In between prints, we can't do anything with them, but are they still real prints? Are they still somebody making transactions within a stock? Of course they are. So even though if we might be, you might say, well, I didn't see any real great ask or any shorter term ask that was really coming back in, it has to be there because otherwise the stock wouldn't keep moving. And obviously, one of the things that that needs to be obvious to us is we're going to be trading stocks with higher volume. So no matter what, if there's high volume, there's trading that's going on. Might not be obvious trading, which, at that point, we don't have to trade it if there's no obvious trading. What we're looking for is things that stand out and scenarios that stand out to us. What's another really great way in this scenario to find an entry point that tells us it's going to be timing? And this goes back to starting to think. What's a scenario that happens, just forget the prints or anything like that, just a scenario that happens where a stock ends up coming down from? What is a high percentage scenario that a stock ends up coming down from? Not hitting. Okay, absolutely. But that's more of an addition. That's more of an addition that we're going to add to something. I'm talking about, we don't even forget what the prints even say. Just something that happens that a very high percentage of the time the stock comes down from. There we go. Volume that can no longer sustain. In this scenario, that is also a great thing to look for. Because when a stock starts pushing like that, we get those bars. But when we get that unsustainable bar that's just completely out of nowhere, we almost always see it come down. Okay, which is a perfect catalyst to start that number one trade. So if we add that within itself, we know that just happens. Forget prints, forget anything. Huge unsustainable volume almost always comes down. Is that not a great time to look for a trade, number one trade, for it to be the timing to take it at that moment? But see, we don't think about these things. We see ask prints over print personality. I want to get into it. When am I going to get into it? That's the key, the timing aspect. And when we can add these little things that give us the timing to a very high percentage, it gives us, it's such a higher percentage in that specific trade. Even though the trade is 70%, we get extra that comes into it based off of knowing what that strategy is. And again, is this going to happen every single day? Because if it doesn't happen every single day, it's useless. We're not going to sit there and study strategies that we're going to see every 2 weeks. That's just that's not going to happen. Okay, so let's talk about another strategy for a stock on its way up. All right, we get prints at the bottom level, so we get our ask prints right here, and then the stock starts pushing up without giving any more type building prints. But it told us it needed to build, but instead is continuing to the upside. What do we need to add into this that will make it a high percentage trade? Because now it's got ask prints and it's just pushing. Yes, I know eventually the stock is going to come down to build, but does eventually help you not get shaken out? Is eventually something happening going to help your win percentage? Or do we have to be aware of the certain things we need to look for that tell us the timing is coming or the timing is now? And obviously, we need to know the timing is coming now. So we push up from ask prints, and now we're up multiple levels. What do we need here for our trade? Because again, just because there's ask prints above print personality does not make for a number one trade. Not all asks above print personality will be a high percentage number one trade. It's just not true. So we have to look for the strategies of how they're implementing or how it's getting there to add to it. Because now we're talking about taking as possible the less than 70% trade, turning it into an 80, 85, 90% trade, depending on the amount of variables that we're going to have coming into it. So what needs to happen in this scenario? Ask at the first level, and it just continues to keep pushing. How are we going to know when a very high probability of the timing being correct now to take this? Because now technically we're getting far away from where we need to be, which is always great, because what does that do for our price target? The further a stock gets from where it needs to be, what does that do for us? Well, we could get more out of the trade, and it gives us a higher percentage because there's going to be less games the further it gets away from it. When it really does make that move, or that trigger back towards that downside, we have a way higher percentage because it's got way more room to go before the games actually get, start playing them. Okay, but I want you to think, what is perfect case scenario here within the prints? We get ask at our first level, and it keeps pushing past it without actually pulling back. What is perfect? What am I now looking for within the prints? Because I'm not going to just look for a trigger. Because again, as we talked before, if I'm just going to look for a trigger down, do I know, is that really giving me a high percentage of timing there by just price action to the downside? It's not, because there's just not really, it's just the stock moving. As of right now, its personality is showing us it doesn't pull back. So we need to focus on what's going to have to come within the prints that are going to make this a high percentage trade. So first of all, we have to figure out, why is it pushing past those prints? Now, what if we can't find any real reason? What if a lot of what's going on is in the in-betweens and we can't really find a good reason? Do we have a high percentage of taking a correct trade there? Even though technically it's going up on what looks like nothing. Do we really technically have a high percentage ability to know? Not really. So obviously that's not going to work for us, is having absolutely no prints. Okay, unlike the first scenario where it went up on nothing and then printed, printing and then going up on nothing helps us in no way whatsoever, because it's not giving us any indication of any type of real timing or any actual spot, spot to even look for of where it would be possible for that to happen. So that does not help us. We need it to go up on something. Now, what is perfect case scenario? Because remember, we don't have to take any trade that's not perfect case scenario, especially when we don't know how many more trades will be there for the rest of the day. But what is perfect case scenario? I want you to think about it. Print line, psych level, or big sum. Okay, so that's not really perfect case scenario. I'm talking about within the prints, because yes, those are all variables that are going to add to our trade, but that's not what's actually happening within the prints. I'm talking about perfect case scenario. What do we see within the prints? What would you want to see that would just say, okay, this is perfect? Short-term sell showing us time frame, more ask above print personality, off level. All right, so I'm going to give you the answer. I want to see it going up on buying, because yes, we're all looking for it to go down. So your mind wants to go to selling, but that's not really what I want. I want there to show a reason of why it's going up. And that reason more than likely would be in off-level prints that have the ability for the stock to continue. Those teen prints. Okay, those 30 prints, those 60 prints, those 80 prints. Okay, I want to see. Why do I actually want to see a reason for it going up? Why do you think that is? Why is it just going up not enough? Why do I want to see? So I can calculate when they've made their money? Absolutely, because it's going to give me a spot for when it does run out of gas. But there's another reason. Calculation is a huge part of it, but there's another reason why I really want to see it going up on something. When a stock goes up for a reason, what does that tell me about the market maker? Yeah, the market maker has intentions, and I can read them. So I actually know that there's somebody there that's making sense out of this. When a stock goes up on nothing, I can't really know really anything about it. It could keep going up. It could keep, when there's, you ever look at a stock with a prints that just barely prints and it's all in between, but the stock is, got a great range. It's moving all around. I don't know why it's doing that. So if I don't know a real game plan, if I don't see any short-term buyers that are riding, the stock and then stopping that short-term buying, then in all reality, do I know that the stock is coming back down, even if it's at a psych level or a print line? Those are giving me higher percentages of it being a time or a chance for that to happen. But is it really telling me it's going to happen? No. So when it pushes up and I don't know the reason, I can't really get behind. And again, it all comes down to the timing of it, because the whole point of an entry, well, in this case, is to short high and cover low. So I need to see something. Now, guess what? Even better scenario. It goes up on buying that I can calculate, runs out of gas or hits its calculation, and then I start to see what? And then I start to see what? Selling. Yes, people getting out at that spot, because that's now confirming exactly what the market maker showed us. Okay, so if they're confirming everything that they're doing, once they're done with that push towards the upside, what's going to end up happening? Where are we coming back to? Conservatively, back to the original ask prints from that first level. So in this case, remember, okay, when there's prints at the top, okay, we want it to go up on nothing and then have ask prints for that to mean timing. And in this case, going up, ask prints first and then going up on nothing doesn't really help us. Because otherwise, what are we going to end up doing besides sitting there and just hoping that at some point its price action and volume back to the downside is going to be the time? But do we really know in that scenario? And again, every one of us has probably sat there trying to take a number one trade at some point where we saw what looked like to be the trigger, we take it, we get shaken out. Push it up a little bit more, we get the trigger to the downside, looks like, it's time to take it. And there's no real understanding of the timing in those scenarios. So they have to show us. If they don't show us in these types of scenarios, then we don't do anything with it. We look for something that follows one of these key strategies. And just by doing that, you'll notice the amount of times that you get shaken out is just drastically going to change, because we're utilizing things that we know that need to happen. Now, when we understand the stock like this in these three different ways, or we understand what the actual movement to the upside is showing us for when the move back towards the downside is going to happen, that gives us the added percentages that we need to be able to actually, take the trade. Do we have any questions so far? It's interesting because when I was trying to build these classes, there's no new information that I'm going to ever give you guys. I mean, it is what it is. Once you learn how to do this, that's it. So the way that I started to think about it is, well, it's very easy to understand 1 through 4 and understand what the prints need to look like, but what about how it's being led up to it that gives us the ability to actually understand timing and when timing will actually make sense? And this is how we need to look at it in a number one trade. All right. Now let's talk about calculations for a second. Okay, what are continuing prints? What kind of prints can give us a stock give us the stock the ability to continue? Because if you don't know the answer to this, you need to immediately figure this out right now, because that's how we're going to be able to understand the calculations of when it makes sense to be at the end. What types of prints give us extension in a stock? I believe it was like 4 or 5 classes ago, maybe even 3, 4, or 5 classes ago, but we literally went through every cent of a dollar to understand what those prints actually mean and how we're supposed to interpret them. So what type of prints are actually giving the stock the ability to extend? Yep, specifics. Teens, 30s, 60s, 80s, with exceptions of 11, 89, and 5s and 0s between them. Yep. Those are the prints that we're looking for, because they're the ones that are actually showing us that the stock has the ability to just keep going. Because do we want to see on a number one trade, do we want to see people coming in constantly as the stock keeps going up? Is that a good sign for us, as we just spoke about? No, I mean at the major levels. So do we want to see constant buying coming in at the major levels each time? Does that help us with our timing of when the number one is going to happen? It does not. So those are the prints that we need to use to give us an ability to understand when that timing is going to go, or that timing is going to be there. Okay, because once those run out and we don't see any more, that's when it now is the likelihood of the trigger actually being time skyrockets. And that's what we need. We need to add as many percentage and variables to each trade that we can. The trades that have 30 variables, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the trades that have tons of variables in them and that they're all aligned together are always going to make your best trades. And that's something that we have to understand. Because if we continue to look at it where we have ask prints above print personality, I'm going to take the next trigger down, are we going to be successful during slow days or lower volume days? Is that going to work out for us? Absolutely not. Now, on the days where volume is just pumping and you have those great trading days, you're going to have great trading days. But the problem is that, let's say there's even 2 good trading days out of the 5. That means the other ones, you're in trouble. These need to be added. And it's a way that we need to look at, each individual. Now, obviously, today we went over 1. This afternoon, we're going to go over 2. Tomorrow, we're going to go over 3, which, again, 3 is going to be an interesting one because definitely the most that needs to go on. And then 4 will be tomorrow afternoon. All right, guys, any questions? So helpful. Thank you. All right. I will talk to everyone in the chat. Remember, Traders Exchange today at 12:30, and also we have our second class 3 p.m.